Salutations, everybody. I'm Lee, the host of Belkatesi Podcast, and tonight I am with the wonderful Dale Brunsvold, the reader and recorder of the works of Rudolf Steiner. Now we're blessed tonight because we get to see Dale, not just hear his voice. Welcome, Dale.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to see you. And been, I've noticed on the YouTube videos, they're now allowing the comments. I have seen lots of wonderful comments saying how you've brought the work of Rudolf Steiner to life. You've brought it into the modern age. Personally, I wanted to congratulate you, and you got my wholehearted support in the work that you do, because I know it's not easy doing these readings, especially out loud and recording them. So yeah, so for myself and everybody else, I just want to give you a pat on the back, and don't stop.
Well, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Dale.
Yeah, and it isn't that hard.
Uh, it's your pleasure.
It is a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. So could you tell us what you've been up to? More reading.
Yeah, more reading. I'm retired and I'm 68 now, and so my life is very comfortable. I'm very fortunate. My wife is a wonderful woman, and we have no kids, and but we're together, and life is nice. I like to bike. I go to libraries. I do a lot of reading of other things besides Steiner. I have a philosophy degree, as you remember, and a mathematics degree.
Sure.
Uh, And I have a little open stage that on Wednesdays I often go to. Lately, I haven't been going to that. And I did go back to Steiner study groups at the lately, which has been something to re-experience. I hadn't done it for maybe 15 years, and
Yep.
so I've been doing that again. Uh, and I take walks, and my life is very pastoral for me, even if I'm in the city. Really, it's not. So there's not much to say. That's it. I like to play guitar a lot. I play guitar quite a bit. And I've written about 100, 120 songs,
Wow.
and and I know a lot of Dylan and Neil Young and John Prine, a few Beatles, and so sorted other things. I've got a gift for that. I don't know where that came from. I'm very fortunate that I have hundreds of songs in my head, and I know them by heart. I don't know how that even happened. So
Is it,
I'll
have you
play and forget myself.
have you been able to record any of this? Put it online or?
Well, I have it sort of online, but it's almost my own personal library. And sometimes people ask me about it. I go, yeah, they're not very good recordings. They're not at all professional. And I keep
Oh,
them up there just, to kind of listen to them. Oh, I recorded that in 2004. You know what I mean? So I'll go back and listen to something from 20 years ago, just for curiosity's sake, listen to my growth and development, listen to how I've changed.
yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, I don't take it. It's just a personal joy for me. I don't think I'm great or anything like that. I just enjoy it. So
Yeah.
yeah. I hope
Excellent.
I'm not into any of that egotism. It really worries me that, when I get all these nice comments from people that it would affect me. And it hasn't so far as I'm aware. And
Yeah.
I don't want it to. I'm a grateful person who, just like everybody else, met the work of Rudolf Steiner, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I am in awe. I am in awe that it happened, that man occurred, that what he created is enduring and is worldwide, virtually in every example. Eurythmy, Waldorf schools, biodynamic agriculture, medicine. I mean, it's staggering to me. Yeah. So we're all in the same boat, and I'm in that boat with you. And I just got lucky. I love to read out loud, and it
Mhm.
took, right. It took.
Sure.
People went, oh, okay, this guy's not that bad. We can listen to Steiner through this guy, and that's really kind of. And for the first 15 years, there really wasn't much going on with the site, and then uh, it just started to take off after that. It took about 15 years before it really took hold.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm done.
Well, in this age of modern technology, where technology was actually designed to save us time, we all seem to be busier than ever. So I do
Yeah,
feel that having the option for audios is very useful for everybody. I
yeah,
myself, I use audios a lot now, a lot more than I used to. I was an avid book reader, got quite an immense esoteric library. But with my sort of deterioration in eyesight, you could say, the lenses on my glasses are getting thicker. It does become a little bit harder to read, especially the small print.
yeah,
So having the option for audios is wonderful, and I have heard other people say the same thing to me. Other people have mentioned that they do listen to the audios that you've done, and they're really appreciative of it because time is very limited for them, and without that, they may have never have heard of any of the lectures. So, yeah,
I think that's true. Yeah, it has turned into that, hasn't it? Yeah, the electronics of it all. Yeah. I
yeah,
will say that even when you retire, I remember at the beginning of being retired, I was, oh my God, I don't have anything to do. My life is empty. And, after a time, you literally do rebuild your life. And you know what? You just get busy again. You're just as busy as you ever were, even though I'm sort of contradicting my pastoral comment. You do. So everybody does that. It's interesting. Well, people don't want to do anything. People really do want to do stuff.
hmm
They whatever it is, they need their lives occupied by activity, and everybody just has to do it almost. Otherwise, we drive ourselves nuts, maybe.
yeah. Um, I was actually listening to one that you did, I think it's from a few years ago now, and there was a mention about seeing the divine in all things and how we need to uh, we need to be able to see the divine in all things, not just the divine in all things, but especially in people, in other people. I think in this particular age where there's so much division, there's so much kind of artificial hatred for people that are
Beautifully said.
different
Yeah.
and different religions, different cultures,
Yeah.
different everything. Being able to see the divine in other people is literally becoming like a superpower. I guess it has always been a bit of a weakness for humans because of this kind of egoic or the survival function in people. Um, but I found it quite it kind of it touched me when I heard Rudolf Steiner in the lectures, really emphasizing that it's important to see the divine in all things, especially in other people. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's wonderful, and I've always wondered, what does a great teacher do? A great teacher provides, let's call them scaffolding ideas that uh, once they're thought through and applied, if they're good ideas, if they're applied, that they allow you to start to begin that process of seeing the divine in nature more and more. And to me, uh, and again, he didn't originate this, but he really brought it into the details of a scientific discipline, you might say, when he talked about the members of the human being.
hmm
And they're almost like Archimedean levers. They really are. Because once you take them in as working hypotheses and you contemplate them, you go, these are reasonable ideas to consider. There's nothing crazy about them. So let's talk about those for a second, and also the way they connect us with the world. And we've talked about this before, but it never hurts to repeat them. But we have this physical body and we look at the mineral kingdom, and sure enough, the substances in our physical body are from that world. And we
hmm
we sort of can, as Steiner says, you really should bow down, kneel before the mineral kingdom and thank it for having sacrificed itself into existence, really, you could say, so that we then have the beginnings of an incarnational vehicle.
hmm
Okay. But then you're looking at it and you're looking at your body and, well, I'm losing 330 billion cells a day.
hmm
There's substances pouring off my organism all the time. Now, we only look at that by microscopically examining cell activity and completely absorbing ourselves in that study. And Steiner doesn't do that or he does that, but at the same time, he says, no, you have to step back and spiritually see that there is etheric world, a world of life forces, a world in this case of formative forces, and they are uh, permeating your physical body, and now you're alive. When they separate from that physical body is then only mineral substance and continues to decay and fall
hmm
apart. But while they're attached to it, it is that body of formative forces that is constantly rebuilding the dying away that is always happening in your physical organism. And we look out into nature and we see the plant kingdom exhibiting that etheric body more beautifully than any other kingdom of nature. That's its essence, really, is that it's matter permeated by life.
Yeah.
And so we bow down to the plant kingdom and go, thank you for sacrificing yourself into existence so that I can then have a life body from your body, as it were, that then keeps this physical body, which is constantly decaying away. It's like a river of substance, right?
Yeah.
And it keeps it in an incarnational situation for me. And then I look, and that's another body. Then I look again at the animal kingdom, and I see what's happened. Well, they're not plants, they're animals.
Hmm.
Why are they animals? Well, they have sentience. They have a feeling life of pain and pleasure that you can phenomenologically experience the pain of an animal. There's no question about it when they're
Sure.
in pain. You know, they're and they're sentient, so they're always using their senses to navigate and move around in the world, which they do. And so we see that world, passions, instincts, drives, and we obviously know that we have that world too. And that world can overtake us. And I
Hmm.
think, in what you were talking about, particularly when it comes to these divisions in the world, that we live too much in the animal aspect of our astrality. We have a human aspect that animals don't have
Hmm.
in our astrality, but we have an animal part too still, right? The angel beast, you could call us in that
Yeah.
sense, right?
Hmm.
So we struggle with that, but we kneel down in gratitude to the sacrificing itself into existence of the animal kingdom, so that this astral world can be something we can experience. And it's interesting, for instance, you could even see the astral, Lee beautifully described in biodynamic agriculture. When a plant grows and grows, it's green, it grows, it gets to a certain place where it matures. And at that point, Steiner says the astral world touches, it touches the plant. And when it does, what occurs? It's so beautiful, really. And again, the divine in nature, we're trying to find exercises to contemplate, right?
Sure.
What you're seeing, he says, what happens? Well, when the astral touches the etheric plant world, you get color, you get aroma,
Mm.
you get oils,
Yeah.
you get differentiation of astonishing beauty,
Hmm.
right? You get the seed eventually that then perpetuates the plant into another incarnation, so to speak. And many other things I'm not describing well because I'm not a botanist. But that's stunning, really, right? And then you get, well, he even says in places, and if the astral goes too deeply into the plant, then it becomes poisonous to the human being.
Ah,
And so
okay.
that's what poisonousness is in plants, as it were. And again, you have people that, as biodynamic farmers, and going back to how do you find the divine in nature, you find the divine in nature by either becoming a Waldorf teacher, a biodynamic agriculture, a eurythmist. So Steiner even gave us vocations
Sure.
through which we could have spiritual paths to exercise our way to the divine in nature. Okay, so then the last thing of all these bodies that we have, not the last one, but of the four main ones, of course, as we know, is what he claims is a reincarnating individuality that is able to embody itself in the physical body and the etheric body and the astral body,
Hmm.
and come to itself as a self-aware being. Now, it can do that to varying degrees, as we're going to talk about, today. And that is, how much can you become yourself, right?
Hmm.
That is a challenge. And we right now in this age, and we could talk about the ages, are so sort of engrossed in our sentience, in our animal sentience of absorbing our sense perceptions, processing our sense perceptions, relating our sense perceptions to each other. We're doing that kind of in a materialistic, not in a kind of, but in a materialistic way that exhausts us in a certain way. And we get a self-awareness that is very shallow.
Yeah.
It's not the fullness of what we hoped. And even we know this. Everybody, strangely enough, in their ignorance, knows they're better than they are, knows that there's something more in them
Mm.
that wants to come into being. Isn't that strange? If we didn't have that, we wouldn't try to have it, right? If we
Yeah.
didn't know it already, we wouldn't even begin to try, right?
I
So
think
we have these
a
bodies.
lot of it gets misdirected. Yeah. A lot of that.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, in the distraction. So he says, so, and we, again, if we talk about these bodies in the way that Steiner does, they appear in the human being in 7-year cycles.
Hmm.
So from birth till you're 7 years old, your etheric body is remaking your physical organism, changing out all the substances your parents gave you. Until at 7 years old, it's completed that process, and you stand with the body you yourself have made because of your life body's processes. And the last thing it gets rid of are the teeth that your parents gave you, the hardest substances in your organism. Steiner says at that point, there's a change in the organism.
Mhm.
And the consciousness changes. And this is the other side of what we wanted to talk about, that has to do with seeing the divine in us, even emerging in a child. You can study this in the pedagogy of Waldorf education, and it's just so beautiful. But it also is aligned with people like Piaget and all the modern pedagogical scientists. So there's really no disagreement, except he says things more blatantly. They would, get a little uncomfortable hearing Steiner say it so directly. They have tons of studies they can only cautiously infer their conclusions from, and Steiner's
Yeah.
arguably seeing this very directly. So then from 7 to 14, you have a beautiful time for education, and the etheric body is kind of living now independently. Steiner says it's unsheathed at 7 years old,
Mhm.
and in fact, it's separated from the mother. So up to that time, your etheric body is united with your mother's etheric body, but your astral body is still united with your mother's astral body until you're 14 or so, when your astral body is unsheathed. Then we know that that's the time of puberty. There we go. That's the time of formal operations thinking. That's the time of the beginning of really a logical thinking that you want to live inside of. Right?
Mhm.
That's kind of new. You want to live in a pictorial, imaginative consciousness in the early years from 7, 8, 9, 10, and then it gradually, starts to move in this other direction. Then finally, around 21, this incarnation of the ego, I don't know if I completed that concept, this reincarnating individuality is born in these three now independent bodies that have created themselves during these 21 years.
Yeah.
Stunning, really stunning. Now, again, this is all spiritual. This is all seeing that, to me, this is
Mhm.
all contemplating the divine in nature. But I do it through the human being. And that's, Steiner said, that's something we really probably, okay, I don't know if he says this. I'm saying it. I think he says it. I don't want to say what, but he wants us to take stock of the human being again more seriously, because science, materialistic science, has cut the human being out of the picture
Yeah.
in order to bring us this objective picture, so-called, of materialistic nature. And he's saying we need to know the human being again, because it's the spiritual being on the earth. We are the spiritual being on the earth. We are the angel,
Mhm.
right? Kind of incarnated in the body, you might say. And we can know ourselves. We can know each other.
To
And
know
in that,
thyself.
to know thyself, and in that knowing of that divinity and understanding it more and more and more, we can then turn back to nature through knowing the human being, not egotistically, not pridefully. All the ways people immediately say to me, "Oh, you're just prideful." No, no,
Mhm.
I'm quite the opposite, right? And then we'll see the etheric world, and not see it. Well, we will see it, but we can contemplate it with working hypotheses that are taken upon oneself seriously. That's the thing we need to talk about today too: is how serious in
Mhm.
this materialism, the dogma of materialism, the dogma of materialism, can we take spiritual ideas seriously? We kind of snicker.
Mhm.
Oh my God, yeah, right, the spirit, yeah, sure. You know, you're
Yeah.
so far gone, Dale. You know what I mean? Think about that, right? And that's just the way of it. How come I have this disease? I don't know, but it's been quite pleasant to have as far as anthroposophy goes, right?
Mhm.
So so we have these bodies, and then I'll just say this. So then immediately when the ego finds incarnation at 21, let's just say it this way, it begins to work back on the astral body. It takes the astral body that it has, and it wants to transform it into something immortal.
Yeah.
It wants to ennoble its impulses so that they're not drawn into the animal side,
Mhm.
but into the human side, which is there. And you get the stature and the growth and the maturity that is kind of talked about when Jesus turns 12, which was puberty. Well, which was, anyway, that's too much of a side. But so it does that for about 7 years. And Steiner talked about a form of consciousness a person has from 21 to 28 that he called the sentient soul period, where there's a beginning of the ego purifying the astral body to the degree that it can, depending on the development and karma of that person. Then
Mhm.
from 28 to 35, it moves into the etheric body. The ego wants to transform the etheric body. And that's called the intellectual soul period of a person's life. And then finally, from 35 to 42, that ego tries to even transform the physical organism. Let's say the forces of the physical organism, maybe is a better way of saying it. And in that period, we call that the consciousness soul period of the human being's biography.
Yeah.
But that also happens to be, from a macrocosmic point of view, of 2160 years, that also happens to be the age that humanity is in right now. It's called the consciousness soul age, which
Yeah.
is one where we're embedded in matter. We're
Hmm.
embedded in our physical bodies to a degree that we've really lost the spiritual, unless we lose our minds. If we go into some belief system where we just kind of lose our minds, we
Is
can find some relationship to the religion, which is, to me, almost scarier, to
so
be honest with you.
is this
So when we
what
talk about finding go ahead.
yeah, is this what Steiner would describe as abstractions? He spoke about the
To me,
abstractions.
they are.
They're no
Yeah.
use. They're no use to spiritual science. The spiritual science of the consciousness soul.
I'll say this. When we hear the word abstraction, we almost want to talk more about Ahriman, right? And the idea of just dead, abstract thoughts. Whereas the passions we're talking about in belief systems is really very Luciferic, right?
Yeah.
Where when you believe, you don't believe with an abstract feeling, you believe with a weird kind of passion that if you don't agree with me, I want to kill you,
Hmm.
right? And that's not so much Ahriman, to me anyway, as it is. I just want to have this belief system, and I want it to be true, and therefore I'm making it true by believing in it. And if you don't agree with me, you're different from me, which is absurd. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I don't care what people believe in, as long as they leave me alone, kind of thing, which is hard for them to do, isn't it? It's very
Yeah.
hard for people to do because
Sure.
they're so passionate, the passion. Okay.
Yeah. So
But yes, yeah.
Rudolf Steiner has given us a framework in terms of the four members of a human: the physical, the etherical, formative forces, the astral, and then the I, or the ego. Yeah. Um, could you talk a little bit about the relationship between that and the angelic or the hierarchy, and how it all works together?
Very nice. So let's continue the process. So here we are, a being with a physical body and an etheric body and an astral body and an ego. And then there is a whole realm of evolution that came before us, just like we are in a process of evolving into the completeness of a certain stage of our existence. There's a higher group of beings above us who are in their stage of evolution. They're undergoing a stage of evolution where they're completing the complete transformation of their spiritual astral body, called the spirit self. They're very close to completing that. Think of this now. What's happened is their lowest body is not the physical body. Their lowest body is their etheric body. That's the lowest body they have. They have an astral body far, far higher in development than ours. They have an ego far higher than ours, very much united with the Godhead. So it's almost probably difficult to describe. And then they have this other body, virtually as complete, let's say, as our ego is, which we're working on right now.
Hmm.
And we call those beings angels.
Yeah.
Okay. And in that sense, they work into us. And as you were mentioning in that work, what was the working of the angels in man's astral body? They're working into us, bringing images that I
Mm.
believe were future oriented, weren't they, Lee? As I recall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But the question then is, do we have the spiritual development in ourselves, in my opinion, to reach up and engage with those images consciously, or are they just going to work unconsciously in us?
Hmm.
Because they're still going to work in us, but
Yeah.
it's, and so what you get is the evolution of humanity as a whole, muddling through. Are you going to be one of those people that takes your own development unconsciously, engage with those, bring the will forces that they give you into something that helps to transform the world faster,
Hmm.
better, more clearly? Like Steiner, it would be an example of. Gurdjieff would be an example of, right?
Yeah.
Where they took this on. So we have that those beings, but then above the angels, there are beings. Their lowest member is not even their etheric body, but their astral body.
Hmm.
And above the spirit self, they have a higher organism. They're actually working on the life spirit, bringing that into completion, and they work into our etheric life.
Hmm.
So that higher one works down into the etheric body. And again, it's very difficult for me to have comfortable way to describe these things, but just imagine those beings doing that. And they're called archangels. And in the realm of, so for instance, in angels, the design of the cosmos, the spiritual cosmos, has placed an angel tied to your individuality, Lee. There's an angel, another angel, tied to my individuality.
Mm-hmm.
And they help carry the continuity of my incarnations for me, my reincarnations. They hold all the memories of all the lifetimes I've lived for me until I rise to a stage where I can take on the fullness of who I am. And part of the fullness of who I am, this is from Steiner, right, is knowing all the good and the bad.
Yeah.
Can you imagine taking that on, the kind of objectivity you would have to withstand that? Think of, we've done probably some pretty horrible things in our past lives, as well as wonderful things, right? And to take that on. And so he says they really, they have kind of in the bosom of their being, they carry this for us. And they're called a guardian angel, right?
Yep.
And interestingly, he talks about one guardian angel in the history, the evolution of consciousness of humanity, when one human being, Buddha, became the Buddha. He then took on this fullness of his being and freed his guardian angel, freed his angel from being tied to him. Wow. And now sort of continuing its evolution in another way. It's done its job. It's accomplished what it was doing. It's quite stunning to me. And again, the divine in the world, contemplating the divine in the world. This is all tied into this for me. Yes. So the archangels work in groups. So in folk souls, we could even say, languages. Okay, they create languages. They help languages come into being that unite a people. Sadly, differentiate people as well. But right, we have that. Steiner had a beautiful picture one time. There's a set of lectures called, if I'm remembering the right one, it's I believe 132 or 136 is the collected works number. The spiritual beings, the heavenly bodies, and in the kingdoms of nature. Beautiful, beautiful set given in Helsinki. I believe 1912. Beautiful center. In there, he says, the outer world, this is so cool. The outer world that the archangels perceive when they look out, so to say, is the inner life of the folk that they are connected to. So the inner world of all those human beings is their perceived outer world.
Yeah.
It's quite gorgeous, really, when you think about it, right? And so they live in that world and they influence it to the degree that initiates arise in it. Of course, they're going to cooperate and work with these archangels in the guidance of that. And we can see that in Rudolf Steiner, for instance. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what we're saying is that the inner world becomes the outer world, or is observable by other beings.
Yes. Yeah. Nice. I should have said that. It's better said. Yes. In this particular case, very much so, this particular folk and their particular archangel, but maybe all the archangels can dive into that world of the Romans or the Germans or the Americans or the British or the Russians or, whatever, but particularly their own folk spirit can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's this thing about, so for instance, when we can get out of time and space, or the limitations of time and space, where we're on the level of, say, telepathy, where it's almost as though a conversation wouldn't have time because you'd already know the answer before the question's asked, if that makes sense. So it's just a case of like a knowing, or a kind of timeless communication. What does that actually look like? I personally, I think we don't really have the language to articulate it, or even have, it's almost like information of that high status, we can't really articulate it in a true and justifiable sense.
Yeah, aren't we? We are in a way given a wondrous form of consciousness that we operate in right now, which is exactly at the same time a prison. Yeah. Right. At the same time, it's its own wall, has its own walls. So I want to understand that time began somewhere. I want to understand that time ends somewhere. I want to understand where the end of space occurs. These are all the materialistically oriented kind of imaginations of our consciousness. They're completely absurd ideas. totally absurd ideas, but we're trapped in them. We want to know the answers to those questions. And I'm not saying that they are insane, but they could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get that picture. Well, and I love the child that says, well, when did that begin? Well, that began then. Well, what was before that? Well, right? And they're almost showing us that we're in something that's a little bit absurd because they can
Mm-hmm.
keep asking the question forever, right? So you're like, wait, I can't answer that. Wait a second.
Well, I,
Oh, that kid. Oh, that kid. What am I going to do with him?
Mhm. Well, this is where, as an example, where Steiner talks about that the angels are able to place images into our bodies in terms of it's a language of images or a communion of images, and it's very similar to parables. So
Nice. Yes.
yeah, so it's a kind of parabolic language as opposed to sort of the English language or the Russian language or Chinese. It's a language of I guess of a higher order, and we're able to get the gist of something as opposed to um, so much literally understanding the names or uh, yeah. I know in remote viewing protocols they talk about describing things without naming them.
And Steiner says in Rosicrucianism, the aspect of anthroposophy that is Rosicrucian, you might say,
Mhm.
that you really can't communicate the higher the higher truths in anything other than symbols in pictures.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And again, when we think about language, well, what is language designed for? Language was designed for the physical material world.
Yeah.
It's for the particularity. It's for the multiplicity. It's for the point and shoot kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
So it makes sense, right? That you can't now you can use it to point, but you can't use it to, as it were, completely nail it down, I suppose is a way of saying it. And I agree with that. So I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And another interesting point that I find with Steiner's work is that he I guess it's kind of a almost a thought process, a thought exercise more than anything, especially at the human level, is trying to even comprehend how our internal organs communicate and how the internal organs communicate to the external world. Of course, they don't use the English language, but there's still a communication, how one organ communicates to the other, the liver communicates to the heart, the blood, the lungs, and there's a whole world, a whole cosmos of communication within us. Now, if we ponder, how does my liver communicate with my lungs or the heart? What is the function of that? It does actually help us lean more in towards the spiritual or even spiritual communication with higher worlds. And also, for instance, if there's an outside incident or actualization, it can actually manifest and change our organ function.
Yeah.
Like I believe he mentions even diarrhea. So an external event could actually cause a human to get diarrhea. What is the communication channel? How does that happen? Well, if that can happen, then it also means that there's a communication channel to other worlds or higher worlds, not just the outside world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when we look at our etheric body, for example, we've stayed pretty simple with it. But Steiner then goes into the fact that, well, in your etheric body, in the human being, you have an etheric heart, which is engaged and related to the building up of your heart. Yeah, etheric spleen, etheric pancreas, etheric lungs. So your pancreas, right, is all its cells are replaced every 24 hours. So you
Hmm.
have a new pancreas, right? So all these things are all happening in different ways. And what you're saying is those life forces even are interacting and working with each other. We have the constellations of the heavens as pictures of colonies of spiritual beings and who ultimately brought forth, like in Pisces brought forth our feet. So they're the 12 parts of the human being are related to the 12 parts of the constellations. I don't know the details of these things. So that's Rosicrucianism again, right?
Yeah.
And there's people that study this by anthroposophical doctors take these ideas seriously and contemplate medicines, when to take them in
Hmm.
relation to parts of the organs of your body. So there we're already beginning to step into, tentatively, right? Step into these connections and communications you're talking about and trying to take them seriously, even though perhaps ourselves, we don't have the direct perception of them. Like in the old folk wisdom, they could look at a plant and go, my liver's telling me that that plant is for my liver in a certain condition of disease, right? That used to be a natural wisdom. We lost that for a reason, but when we bring it back again, we'll be wide awake in a knowing that we wouldn't have had like we did before, let's say. It was all unconscious sleep knowledge, but it was true knowledge, right? So, I mean, we could really go a long ways with that, as you're you're hinting. It's very, very deep and profound. So let's again a little bit about meditation. Should we go to that? Because that does tie into what you're talking about. So I don't know enough about all the different forms of meditation and all the disciplines to compare Steiner to them in some ways. And if I do accidentally do that, I'm sure I just want everybody to know I'm probably doing it superficially, so don't get upset. But Steiner says that in the case of our modern age, it isn't a question of how shall we say this, of letting thinking kind of go its own way and just get it out of the way. He says, no, you don't do that. You don't kind of get thinking out of the way or do thinking or let it float and not affect it. Right? Those are some disciplines in the world. Let it, don't, your ego is grabbing onto your thinking. Let that go and your ego will be free of it. Blah, blah, blah. Right? He's saying quite the opposite. In our time, the life of thinking, because it's related, let's say this, to the angelic world, and it's related to these images. If we want to step into that world and truly experience consciously these images of these angelic beings in the higher worlds, we have to begin by doing exercises that take hold of our thinking and bring it under our own control with a strong ego. And in other words, it makes the ego stronger because, we think we have a strong ego and all we have is egotism. And that's not the same thing, right? So once we have that strong ego, he says, okay, so you take let's say an image. And one of the Rosicrucian images, as we know, is a black cross with 7 roses. You hold that image. See if you can hold it for 5 minutes and not let one single thing distract you. It's almost a joke, right? That isn't even, that's almost like telling somebody, everybody will laugh around the table when they hear that. Because of course your mind's going to run all over the place because you don't have control of it.
So control of thought is the number one, isn't it? It's the number one of the exercises.
It is a rhythmical, meditative, let's say 5 minutes a day effort in bringing your thought under control, which may take a long time. It will, in most of us, take maybe more than one lifetime. But all the efforts you make, he argues, carry over to your next incarnation. They're preserved. All the effort you make is preserved. Interesting, huh? That he says that. Were you going to say something else?
It's not wasted then.
Apparently it's not, he says. But eventually then, let's say you have that. You're able to truly control your life of thinking. You can hold images. You can contemplate a pin and go through the careful process of how the pin came into existence all the way from the mining of the minerals. This is called the contemplation exercise. And again, as part of the idea of completely controlling the steps of your thinking. And again, one of the things when I appreciated when he described these things, Lee, was my mathematics degree. And it isn't a great degree. I have a very shallow one, but I could teach with it and stuff. But I remember, right, and we have all done this, where you've got some kind of complex problem and you're going through the steps to solve it. And you're being more conscious in that activity than you ever are in your day-to-day life already. Already you are, because you don't want to get a wrong answer, right? So you're step by step, you're so careful, you're so awake, you're so controlled, and you get the wrong answer. Come on, and that's very humbling to me. That was humbling as a kid, right? Oh, I thought my thinking was so great, Well, it is if I could have control of it. If I was and I did, I got better at that, right? I had a pretty good percentage, let's say, in advanced algebra, because I really saw my shortcomings and I turned to them and I took them on myself. And I said, this is it, knock it off, So anyway, so here's the thing. So we get to that point. Let's say we have the control of our thinking. Now, here's what he says you do. Now that you have such a powerful set of forces you created in your soul through these exercises and through an objectivity your ego now has that it never had before. It's not an egoism anymore.
Hmm.
It's an egohood. Let's call it that.
Yeah.
You now possess an egohood. He says, now you take this power and you suggest away everything. You create a perfect, controlled, intended void.
Hmm.
And you hold that because you can hold it. You hold it because you can, right? And when you do that, because of the soul forces you built up, you don't fall asleep because that's what you know. That's normally how you fall asleep is by creating that void, right? You're awake in that void, and Steiner says the spiritual world streams into that void,
Hmm.
and you begin to experience the spiritual world. Now, one of the fascinating things we've been talking about it almost as things, but Steiner more or less talks about the spiritual world as relationships between beings, right?
Yeah.
They're beings. Angels are beings, individualized. Maybe you can able to say that. Archangels are beings. Archai are beings. We haven't gone to the higher ones than those. And there's 9 of them that Steiner uses. The Dionysius of Areopagites book, Divina Natura, he uses that typology to
Hmm.
describe the world. And then from that, what happens? Well, that's part of the fascination of everything. In the book Knowledge of Higher Worlds or Knowing Higher Worlds, Steiner then talks about uh, the type of cognition you now have, that where the percepts and the concepts that you have are very different. And what would that look like? What would a person who begins to have these abilities, what would they look like? And I always say to people, look at Rudolf Steiner,
Yeah.
look at Gurdjieff,
Hmm.
look at the initiates of our age. What did they do? What did they accomplish? Why did people meet them and knew something had happened? Something special had happened in their life. They had met somebody who was not a regular person, and they weren't trying to cow you into believing in them. They weren't trying to jigger you into worshiping them. You
Yeah.
just stood there stunned. Wait a second here. I'm asleep.
Hmm.
I'm laying down. I thought I was standing up. Et cetera, et cetera. Right. So
Yeah, so
yeah, go ahead.
Gurdjieff famously said, in order to know, we have to learn how to know, or we have to know how to know. So, from what you're saying, it sounds that Rudolf Steiner has given us techniques to develop um, abilities to communicate with higher worlds. In order to
I
have
think so.
the
Yeah.
ability to have the organs of perception activated to receive this information or data, or
And that's the other side of it that we're describing it with a very kind of inwardness, but from
mm,
the point of view of these 4 bodies as well. Thank you for saying that. We're really awakening organs of perception in our astral body that have always been there. And
mhm,
they're sort of half developed, and we're developing the other half. In Buddhism, and maybe even in Hinduism, they were called lotus flowers, the 16 petal lotus flowers of the heart area, the 2 petal lotus flower of the larynx. The chakras, I guess, is another word for them, right?
yeah,
These are all organs of perception that see worlds. Now, what I never like about our modern times is in the world of dead abstractions, we call these qualitative worlds different dimensions. I just think that's sad. That's just dead abstraction. Every
yeah,
one of those worlds is rich with its own unique qualities. The etheric world, man, the
hmm,
astral world, man. I mean,
yeah,
these are shockingly different worlds. They're not dimensions, for heaven's sake. That's
hmm.
a horrible word to use, right? They're worlds. Yeah.
Um, I recently moved to a quite spectacular location. I'm surrounded by forests and trees and all kinds of wildlife, and a very simple exercise for me is just simply observing how um, nature interacts, and that you can see very quickly, very clearly, the levels of reciprocation. And um, one tree is dependent. So one tree can't produce fruit unless an insect goes to it. And there's some kind of interaction between the insect and the tree. All the tree can do is produce some kind of blossom. Then the insect brings something to it, a substance of some sort, and then a fruit will manifest. So what I'm trying to say is there's so much interconnectedness that we don't ordinarily see, especially in contemporary life or urban life, that it's good, or it's refreshing to have a bit of a kick up the backside to wake up to these ordinary things that are taking place all of the time, but we just don't notice them. I guess it's like wake up and smell the roses, or even smell the coffee.
Yeah, yeah. No, and that's the other side that I'm really just dismissing, and I shouldn't. And that is that the world as it is, like you're saying, the interconnections, they reveal the spirit beautifully. And remember the wonderful nature shows we would see where they would unpack the relationships between
Hmm.
flowers and insects and various animals and how they burrow and why a beaver, makes the dam and what's going on. And the shocking, beautiful, innate intelligences active in these beings. They're
Hmm.
unaware of it, in my opinion, but they live in this wisdom,
Hmm.
right?
Well, with you talking about the hierarchy, it reminds me that we're not um, we're not truly independent. We are interdependent with all kinds of life form, impulses, forces, um, in the direction that we're taking it in terms of the hierarchy. So we kind of understand on a kind of horizontal, ordinary level, day-to-day level, that we have to negotiate with work, bosses, banks, and all of those things to survive. But in terms of the hierarchy, in terms of our development or true development of consciousness, or as a spiritual being, there's also the interconnection with the hierarchy, and the hierarchy interconnects with the next layer or level, and yeah, all the way up, all the way down. There's a communion of some sort or another. It's just that we generally are not aware of it or awake to it.
Yeah, I mean that's the goal, right? Is to become uh, a, a, a hierarchy of beings. The 10th hierarchy, Steiner calls us. There's 9 hierarchies above us. There'll be this 10th hierarchy that we're working on right now, and the higher beings, as we mentioned before, the higher world sees the Earth kind of as a womb,
Hmm.
and in that womb, it's birthing the 10th hierarchy of spiritual beings. So, as Steiner says in a couple places, that we are the religion of the gods.
Mm.
We are their religion. They're nurturing us. They want us. Well, then why are they making pain and suffering and killing and horrible things, right? All that stuff. And that's its own story to talk about that. I think anthroposophy really answers beautifully. This whole idea of God, there can't be a God because God would never do anything bad. Well, right. You have a lousy picture of the understanding of God. That's all.
Hmm.
That's all there is. Of course, God wouldn't do that in the picture of God that you think you have.
Yeah.
Then it would be contradiction. Therefore, you can dismiss God. Well, no, you just have a lousy concept. Calm down. Get yourself back in gear and look at the human being again. If we're reincarnating individualities, how do we become free? What happens when we become free? Why would the hierarchical worlds separate us off from them?
Hmm.
Well, because you can't be free otherwise. You
Hmm.
can't be free if you're in the awe and in the overshadowed glory of the higher worlds.
Yeah.
You're just going to be, you're not going to be aware that you're naked then. You're
Hmm.
only aware that you're naked when you're in a physical body separated from the Godhead. And the minute that happens, we get something, right, called karma. And
Hmm.
karma creates its own hell, and karma creates its own heaven.
Hmm.
And that's where we are. We're in our own creation now.
Yeah.
And the worlds are saying, we're here. We're here. Grow to us.
Hmm.
Raise yourself up out of your astrality that's still animalized. Raise yourself to us, and you will
Hmm.
have heaven on earth. As
Yeah.
above, so below, right?
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
there's an exercise that I practice now. Um, it's very easy. I would say it's very easy to have the feeling or thinking that the world is conspiring against you on many different levels. So I always ask the question, is this realm, is this reality conspiring for me or against me? Now, this brings into question all of the things that go right that I just don't notice. All of the blessings that I
Ah,
have that go unnoticed. Now, I did notice I can't remember which lecture it was, but it's something along the lines of to become aware of the things that go well or go right for us, even karmically. Now, if we could actually bring that into our psyche or into our day-to-day thinking or feeling, it would actually be quite transformative because we would have a sense of gratitude or thankfulness that tends to not be there ordinarily. Um, so you could say that the seraphim are actually conspiring to help us because to help us is helping them. It's it's
Yes,
reciprocal in
as
nature.
well.
Yeah,
They are evolving as well. Yes. So
yeah.
Steiner says.
And so this struggle that we have between things going well and things not going well, um, I guess this is our story. This is our story of our growth and development. I also remind myself of when a seed is in the earth. If the seed was to look around and just look at the earth and think, is this it for me? Is this my reality? It would be quite a sad seed. But the seed has to kind of look at the temporary circumstances and look at the benefits of the nourishment that the soil or mud is giving it to it, and that there's actually it's conspiring for me to get out of here.
It's a beautiful picture. And it is the warmth of the higher worlds, right?
Hmm.
The loving warmth of the higher worlds that activates this transformation in them, right?
Hmm.
And one part goes down into the earth green, and the other part goes up out of the soil green, and it begins to unfold. That's
Hmm.
nice. I like it. The sad seed. Well, here's one, right? Steiner would always challenge us with this because karma and reincarnation to me just open our lives up much. Whether I don't know if it's true or not, but as a working hypothesis, it's quite transformative. He says there is a point in the development of a human being. He says that's very important, and he says, and really the metric to know you're at that point is where you can actually take hold of your whole life, contemplate your life from when you were born till now, and see in every blow of destiny, in every difficulty, and also in every wonderful thing, but mostly right in these blows of destiny, the need for them, and to actually end up with the most profound uh, uh, feeling of gratitude
Hmm.
for every single thing. And let's say it this way: for every single bad thing that ever happened to you.
Hmm.
When you get to that, you can authentically hold that gratitude. You have really reached a very significant threshold in your spiritual development. And if you don't get there, you could argue that it's always going to be a place where is stopping you
Yeah.
because you're blaming someone else for
Hmm.
something that your own karma has created. No matter what we see blaming out there that we can easily think is at the fault of it, we brought it on ourselves for ourselves because pleasure doesn't develop, suffering develops.
Hmm.
It's just the sad fact of the world, right? If I
Yeah.
just lived in a cotton candy place with my couch and my TV and all the food brought to my mouth without even using my arms, gosh, a lot of development would really be going on there, man. You know?
Yeah. And also,
So, yeah.
also these what we would perceive to be negative things that happen can quite often become the positive things. We did touch upon this when we spoke in the previous podcast. Um, there's there's a story, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit. I'll try and bring it right down. So there's this farmer, and he finds a horse. His neighbor says, "Oh, aren't you lucky?" And the farmer says, "Maybe." Anyway, the next day, his son jumps on the horse, falls off, and breaks his leg. The neighbor says to the farmer, "Oh, aren't you unlucky?" The farmer turns around and says, "Maybe." And then the third day, the army comes to collect the son to take him to war. But because he's got a broken leg, they say, "Ah, you got to stay at home." So the neighbor says, "Ah, aren't you lucky?" And the farmer says, "Maybe."
Wonderful.
The farmer
That's a
understood.
beautiful picture. Keep
Yeah.
going. Keep going.
No, no, that's it. That's it. So,
Yeah.
the farmer understands the sort of the blessing and the curse, the interconnectedness of the two. Whereas the neighbor was just looking purely at like, oh, you've got a horse, you're lucky. Oh, broken
Yeah.
leg,
Yeah.
unlucky. Oh,
The
not going to war,
Yeah.
lucky.
And that's a beautiful example, Lee, of what you were talking about earlier, how images and parables teach far better than me
Mm.
going into a long didactic tirades.
No, don't stop. Don't stop.
That's really, really good. I like that. And that's taught me a lot. I think it's helped me enormously in life. And people say, well, how do you bring anthroposophy alive?
Mm,
What are we going to do? Well, part of it is that it's helped me in my own life, I think, even though I don't know anything. I take these ideas and try to take them seriously, and I try to
mm,
live with them. Why not? I don't know anything anyway, right?
mhm.
So I might as well try something. And they're so life giving, and they're so they help me forgive in such profound ways.
Yeah.
Uh, and for instance, when I look at the human being, well, if I'm a physical body, etheric body, astral body, and I, which part of you matters most? None of the
Mm,
lower ones. I don't care that you're male or female or black or white or any language you speak. I care that you are an I, that you are I am. I care that you're a spiritual being incarnated. That's the first thing we have to see. And if we
mhm.
did, what you and I worry about and bemoan really is all that suffering. So much of that would disappear. It would
Yeah.
just shed its ignorance and idiocy, and I would see you as a spiritual being. You would see me as a spiritual being, and we would go from there. You know what I mean?
Mm. Well,
It's strange, isn't it?
it's the ability to perceive the possibility of a higher world or a higher place other than this sort of 3D realm that we find ourselves in at this moment in time. Like I say, I always use the exercise of um, being the seed in the mud. You know, how in that
Yeah.
moment the seed must be thinking, what the hell's going on here? But but if it doesn't, if it couldn't connect to the potential of what it's going to become, then it would have a very sad life. But in reality, it's going to have a glorious life. So I use that to remind myself that if I can keep if I can keep my organs of perception awake or be able to communicate or even remember the possibility of the hierarchy or higher worlds and that there is a conspiracy for us down here to help us, then
Yeah.
yeah, it's transformative. And okay, so where where we where does humanity find itself at right now? Now, Steiner's very persistent in trying to remind us that there is a evolution of humans. Within humans, we haven't always been the same. Um, there's these forces at work. You've got the Luciferian forces, you've got the Araman forces, you've got the influences of guardian angels, all the way up to the seraphim and beyond. But in this time right now, where there is no Rudolf Steiner physically, your Gurdjieffs are gone, your Spencers are gone. Um, what do we do? What is left for us?
So we can look at the body of the works of initiates and see what is there. And I think the body of their work is what they left behind. And to the degree that it's rich, to the degree that we can connect with it, we still have our teachers. So if I want to become a farmer, if I become a biodynamic farmer, I really have to become something very, very rich and holistic, right? And
Mhm.
and Steiner says, for instance, if you study the knowledge of higher worlds, I will, in fact, you will find a relationship to me in the spiritual world through that.
Yeah.
Without exception, every person will. He says this in a particular place. So that's interesting. So when we say gone because our physical perceptions don't perceive them anymore.
Yeah.
But they're not gone in that sense. But I don't want to get all flaky about that either, right? That's not healthy for me. But I can become a Waldorf teacher, and I meditate on my students at night, and I contemplate their reincarnated individualities. Why? Why am I doing any of this? Because Rudolf Steiner taught me to.
Hmm. Yeah.
And not only that, he's teaching me every time I go into the classroom because I'm in a Waldorf environment. I'm trying to become a true Waldorf teacher, right? So
Hmm.
I study and live into the knowledge of higher worlds. I study the pedagogical courses. I interact with other Waldorf teachers. All of us trying to live into, if it's an authentic situation, right? Trying to live into this. So I have each other.
Mhm.
Funny way to say it. I have each other, and we are kind of the initiate together. We are
Yeah.
working together to awaken each other, to awaken ourselves. Um, so I want to say, I hope that's true, what I just said, right? I want to hope that's true. And I can do it with farmers. I can do it with medical doctors. I can do it with eurythmists. I
Mhm.
can do it in a Christian community with the people there, hopefully, and many other places, many other things that Steiner created that I'm not, necessarily locking into right now. Even Valeda, right? The Valeda pharmaceutical company. Well, what do those people do there? The Bauschka products that are created out of Steiner's work. They're probably living into Steiner's work there. So they're all practicing this thing.
Mhm.
And then in my own personal life, then I would be doing the meditations, and I would be doing the developmental exercises he's given us in so many different ways. There's a lot of them, by the way. I'd be
Yeah.
working with the mantras every morning. I'd be working with the calendar of the soul every day, right? So there's so much that if we want to engage it, that it's there. So his presence in that sense is pretty palpable if you want it to be palpable.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, I know Gurdjieff, he said to his students that those in the future will know me better than the students I
ah,
have with me right now, because in many
yeah,
ways, because he was there physically, they kind of took him for granted. They kind of had this assumption that he'd always be there and that he
yeah,
kind of did a lot of the work for them, which he really opposed that. He really didn't like it. He spent a lot of his time trying to run away from the students. From, um, but he did claim that in the future that the students that never met him would actually be closer to him because they would have to make a genuine effort to do the
yeah.
work. Yeah.
Well, there's a great anecdote of Steiner where he's late for a lecture, and as he's going into the auditorium, uh, the lady that's with him is urging him on because she's so distraught because he's so late, and he stops, and he bends down and he ties his left shoelace. She goes, Dr. Steiner, why are you doing? Why are you stopping and tying your left shoelace? You're late. We got to get to the things. If I don't tie my left shoelace, he said, half the audience will be walking around with their left shoelace untied tomorrow. Sad, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that weird thing. It's yeah. I don't know what goes on. I guess we don't. I guess is it is it that we want to be saved, that we don't really want to do the work, that we just really want to be taken up by some glorious, and this is Lucifer, right? We just
Yeah.
want that Luciferic force to raise us into and do lunch with God, kind of thing, right? It's strange, but
Yeah.
we've got
But
Ahriman's gravity and rationality that pulls us down. Now, can we live into the polarity, the tension of that, and grow?
yeah, I mean, it's probably connected to when I mentioned to you before, previously, about how I can't remember which lecture it was, but um, Steiner spoke about being automatically good through the Luciferian impulse.
Right.
So I think this does actually connect to it. So yeah, we want to be good, but good automatically. We want it for free.
Yeah.
We don't want
Let
the free will goodness where we have the choice to not do good, but we actually choose to be good, as opposed to you are good and that's it.
yeah. So let's take that picture. That's good. So that ties into again one of the other to me the most beautiful concept that Rudolf Steiner gave us really is the evolution of consciousness. So we go back to like 3000, 4000 BC, and we're like in the Egyptian culture and other cultures. And again, there was differentiation around the world. So I am generalizing a little bit.
Hmm.
We go to that culture, he said. So the people there in their world of consciousness did not have very much of a self at all. And their experience of their thinking life was actually the presence of spiritual beings. Let's say the angelic beings. Let's even use that word, though I don't know they were angels. Let's say they were.
Hmm.
So the angels are living in their consciousness in a way that these people are directly experiencing these beings directly, not through abstract dead thoughts, but through living presences of spiritual beings in their consciousness. Steiner said that they then were coerced into all their activities in the day, that they were so overwhelmed by the presence of these beings in their consciousness that they did what was the hive, you might
Yeah.
say, what the hive needed.
Hmm.
Was there good there? Were they being good? Are these people moral? Right? It's an interesting question, isn't it? If
Yeah.
Steiner's idea of evolution of consciousness is true, then we would say, well, no, they were animalism. Is an animal good or bad? No, an animal isn't good or bad. An animal is in a survival mode. They have to
Hmm.
kill to eat. They do what they need to do. You never judge them. Nobody lays a moral trip on an animal, right? Well, we
Hmm.
wouldn't lay a moral trip on these beings either. Now, we do in our artificial understanding of history. We say, oh, look, the Pharaoh ruled all these people. They were all subjected to a totalitarian society. That's just stupid.
Hmm.
Okay. From the point of view of the evolution of consciousness, they didn't live in our world at all. So here we have that. So gradually, what happens? Well, we have what's called the fall. So in the fall is essentially the receding of these spiritual beings from our consciousness.
Hmm.
They leave. But when they do, we need something to replace them. And what we use more and more and more is the fullness of the data of our physical sense perceptions that we ourselves need to process ourselves, right? And therefore this kind of thinking that we have now gradually arises where they are not involved. But because they're not involved, nevertheless, the life of thinking is still something that is present, that is still working into us. But the only way we can access it as this incarnational deepening occurs is through the brain. We can only access it through the brain. But the brain, the best the brain can do is give us a reflected experience of this living presence called thinking. Thinking is a living thing, right?
Yeah.
But we don't experience it as a living thing anymore until we rise back up to it. We experience instead the dead, corpse like shadows of thoughts.
Hmm.
And they're images. But here's Steiner's beautiful point. He says, but it's just like when you look in a mirror and you see a reflection in a mirror, you're free from that reflection. It doesn't control you anymore. You're free. So here we are now where we experience these images instead of the living beings in the realm of thinking. We experience the dead images. And because of that, we're free.
Hmm.
Okay, now, as you said, uh, in that world, now we have this choice, right? Now we can have choice.
Hmm.
And we can be evil and we can be good and we can do the good and we can do the evil. And where now, I think now to keep going would be that where does that automatism come from? Why is that a worry? And it is a worry, right?
Yeah.
Why is it? Do you have thoughts on that
Um,
by any
well,
chance?
well, I think going back to what you said about reflection, there's a very, I think it's a very, very deep saying, and that is that the mirror never smiles first.
Yes.
Very simple, and it does actually give you a bit of a conscious shock, you could say, in terms of the responsibility or having a self that can initiate as opposed to being controlled by the outside, which is what the definition of a
Yes.
machine or an automaton is where it's completely controlled by the outside. Now,
And even an animal argued, you could argue that is
through the
determined by
instincts,
the outside. Yep.
yeah,
Instincts.
instincts
But
and the
sense
environment.
perceptions are what sense response. Yep. Keep
Yeah.
going.
Um, so, and it's very much like somebody that says that it's like somebody that smokes who finds himself on a desert island and there's no cigarettes, claiming that they've given up smoking.
Nice.
Um, so it's I tend to look at this realm or this reality and the algorithms and how it's constructed and how it's set up is that it's given us the possibility to um, do good or bad automatically, like an automaton. But ultimately, if we can have the free will aspect, the free will to do good or not, or to do bad or not good, there's a big difference. There's a whole world of difference. It may look because we can't look at another person and we can't look inside their conscience or their decision making process. We only see the results. We don't know whether they're
Right.
acting as an automaton or whether they made a conscious decision to do X, Y, or Z. So I think for the most part, we don't know what goes on. We just see the consequences and the actions of people externally. But I think with the raising of consciousness, there has to come a point with the evolution of consciousness where we do have free will.
So you're saying we don't have that yet?
I I don't think so. No, I
I agree.
yeah, I
I
don't think.
agree with you. Yeah.
I think it's an assumption and it's an assertion that we do have free will, but I think at the ordinary level we don't. I think we don't have enough of the ego in terms of the true I ego to withstand the external forces and impulses. I think for the most part, humanity is steered by external influences, and I think our experience here is to evolve and to develop that permanent ego that is enough to withstand, or at least to work symbiotically or in reciprocation to these external forces, or ideally to the hierarchy.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, examples, exceptional cases where maybe we could argue, what is it like for there to be a free will? Really, for instance, is when I'm trying to solve a math problem. When I'm
Hmm.
trying to solve a math problem, my ego really takes over and really controls every step of what I'm doing. And I'm not letting anything around me or outside me or anything, or inwardly, even if I'm ill, interfere with some very specific process that I'm needing. And that's a dry picture, I realize, but it's kind of that picture of what you're talking about, that ego that is truly centered in the eye of the hurricane,
Hmm.
right? And is quiet and aware and unmoved by the movement around it, as it were. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's a long process. And clearly, right now, it's even like we're going the wrong direction, almost, you know what I mean? As a humanity, worrisome in that sense,
Yeah.
I might be wrong about that, but tend to have that. But yeah. And
Mm.
that's again why any kind of spiritual development, you might argue, is better than none because we need to work on something that we don't have yet. Or
Yeah.
and they go, oh yeah, you got that already because you can do bad things. Well, like how much of that is automatic? How much of that is an automaton reaction and not, in other words, an act of free will. I like this idea anyway. Is an act of creation. It's a creative moment that happens,
Hmm.
and if that isn't happening, then you're just doing other things. You're still responding to whatever needs you have because we have those, right? But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
maybe if yeah.
I would also say, yeah, I think creativity is a way of it, of almost mm, defining free will. So as an exercise that
Ah,
I took many years ago, with a teacher, they asked me to draw a creature that I'd never seen before, that nobody's ever seen before. So I drew this creature. It had something like a zebra body, a elephant head, crocodile legs, and dog tail. So to me, it was a new creature. But then the teacher said, "Well, all you've done is taken bits and parts of other creatures that already exist. I asked you to draw something that's never existed before." The conclusion was I couldn't do it.
yeah. No, I love that. As Steiner talks about this in detail, he says, you can't imagine a color that doesn't exist.
Hmm. Yeah,
So that's very fascinating, right? So
yeah.
that's another. So what's your point by making that? Keep going.
Well, in that we're dependent on things that already exist, which include impulses, which include forces. I think to have free will means that that you can be free to have your own will, which would also, a way of demonstrating that would be to create something free, something that isn't associated, something that isn't uh, maybe part of Araman or Lucifer, if it's even
So
possible.
Steiner wrote a book called The Philosophy of Freedom, right, which was
Hmm.
his really first major publication. I think it was 1898, maybe 1896, where he tries to bring a picture of what freedom could be.
Hmm.
Have you ever read it? Have you ever read that book?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that idea of percepts and concepts
Yeah.
and this idea of ulterior motives, the idea that your inner life has to be, well, I'll say it this way, I guess, where there's nothing ulterior occurring, that
Hmm.
your consciousness is cleaned and clear
Yeah.
and you are living out of that. but also that your percepts and your concepts are communing for the knowledge that you acquire, right? That is knowledge. Knowledge is when a percept from my physical senses meets up with a concept that my ego sees. That's my organ of perception for the world of concepts. And I know something. Now, I may only know it at a certain level, and and that can grow and grow and grow. I always loved a statement by Gurdjieff that I used as a teacher. He said, everyone learns everything in connection with something else.
Sure.
There's nothing you can learn in an isolated fashion. That's an illusion of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's all because you brought it into connection with something else that you know. And I love that. That freed me up from sort of that factoidal, dead way that teaching still occurs, I guess. But it doesn't, though, because the learning is still done by the students through what Gurdjieff described. You don't just know the fact. You have to find a way, by golly, to get that into some kind of contextual understanding. I'm going to say it that way, if you would. But
yeah,
we're rambling a little bit.
Okay, so right, correct me if I'm wrong. This could be an assumption that I've come up with. Now, the hierarchy, for the most part, it's veiled, it's hidden from us, and there's a good reason for that. And the good reason could be that, guess what? We have to figure this stuff out for ourselves for the most part. We can't just be given to us, because we would become automatons. We need to have just enough free will. So going back to the question, do we have free will? Probably my truest answer would be no, but we have a little bit, maybe sometimes, of free will. It's almost like a seed. We could use the seed analogy. We've been given a seed of free will to give us that possibility to evolve without becoming an automaton. Because at the end of the day, this whole realm, this whole ray of creation could have been created where it's all been given to us. But then what would be the point?
Right. So let's go back to cognition. So, for instance, an animal, you could argue, it's the percept that it receives through its senses automatically unites with a concept. It doesn't even know it has it. And so its knowing is done completely in the world of instinct. It's accurate, it's correct, but it's not really the higher worlds working, you might say, into the animals. In the human being, as Steiner describes in Philosophy of Freedom, we're in fact broken. We actually live in a wound. And in that wound, the percepts that I have are not automatically connected to the concepts that belong to them.
Sure.
And it's precisely in that gap that I wake up and go, what? Wait, I need to know. And the only way I can know is for my concepts to find or for my percepts. Let's say if this is correct. I see before I think. So I'm looking for the concept that will fit the percepts that nag at me. I want to know. I need to know. I'm driven nuts if I don't know. Now, that is not really instinct anymore. That is not really unfreedom, right? Yeah. There really is you're driven by this brokenness to reunite it, to commune. The highest spiritual communion, Steiner said, is when a percept truly meets its concept, right? That a knowing occurs in us. For the moment, we're satisfied. For the moment, we are who we are. For the moment, we wake up to who we are. So in little micro examples, we could say we're free.
Yeah.
Right. In that way, right? Except for the bigger ones with our passions and our instincts and our desires driving us into the madnesses we otherwise undergo. But okay, I wanted to throw that in. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of going to change direction slightly, but as with all of this, is kind of interconnected. Now, Steiner puts emphasis on the phases between wake and sleep and being awake. I do sometimes, and I put a lot of work into those moments. Now, I sometimes have a realization that they could actually be the times when I'm freest. I'm kind of free from sleep and I'm free from being awake. It's almost like a twilight, midpoint between those two worlds. And maybe this is why it's important to pay attention to those moments, when we wake up and when we go to
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the crossing the abyss or some kind of threshold in consciousness.
And again, we have the beautiful concept of Steiner that we have in sleep, going to sleep, we have the separation for people of the astral body and the ego from the physical and etheric bodies. So they are separated, and that is called sleep by the normal human being. And that's what initiate is seeing, and clairvoyant is seeing, is the separation. And the minute that happens, your life body is freed from the damaging, destructive activity of the astral body within it and begins to heal your organism. It begins to regenerate itself for another incarnation, you might say, of that astral body and ego when you wake up. So those bodies are something that need to create destruction in the organism for self-awareness to manifest on the physical plane.
Yeah.
Interesting, right? Yeah. Now, here's what I found over time, because I always struggle with belief, Lee, and at the same time, and again, I'm just saying this out loud. There's no reason anybody's going to believe what I'm saying, because there's no way to do it otherwise than to say what I'm saying out loud. And that is, I just know, I don't believe, I just know the spiritual world is present. It's not a big, gigantic knowing, but people ask me, I go, no, I'm not believing that. I know that's true. That's just true. And it struggled with it. I was angry with myself because it was so poorly realized conceptually. And I thought one day, and we're tying this into that, well, what happens when I see, the problem is, why don't I remember when I'm asleep and my ego and astral body are in the spiritual world, united with the hierarchy? Steiner says that's what's happening. You're united with them. And then I wake up, why don't I remember all that wonderful experience I just had? And the reason is because all our memory life is through our astral body pressing experience into the etheric body. And it's etheric body that is our body of remembering. So what happens in the old initiations? In the old initiations, you would have 12 hierophants, and you would have the neophyte down in a sarcophagus-like thing. Because of their high level of development, they would then draw the ego and the astral body of the neophyte out of the body, but they would also draw the etheric body really, really far out of the organism. So far that the person looked dead. You could check their pulse, everything. They were dead, but they weren't. These hierophants were holding them in this special condition. And during that time, what happens when we're all sleeping, let's say, but they were, of course, developed for this, that they then lived in the spiritual world, had experiences in the spiritual world. And then when they were brought back together again, let's say, they remembered.
Yeah.
And this is how civilizations were guided for thousands of years in these mystery schools, they were called, right? Okay, so here we are now. In our time, we have these separations. And I think that I said, well, I don't have that anymore. But what I do have is the moments you're describing. Just for a moment, just my etheric body, my astral body, and my ego, just when they're starting to unite with my etheric, this is me now, not Steiner. When they're uniting, I get a quick moment of spiritual experience that touches my etheric body. Because that's what I've been doing all during sleep anyway. But just for that one moment, I get an experience of it, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And then I wake up into the physical world and absorb the physical sense organs again. Well, then what happens? Then I go to sleep. When they separate just for a moment, my etheric body gets a little tap of the spiritual world. Now, here we are. If we're lucky enough, if we have grace in our lives, from birth, waking, sleeping, waking, sleeping, waking, sleeping, waking, sleeping, these little taps of the spiritual presence of the world grow, congeal into a knowing.
Yeah.
Not a very big knowing, right? Not something I can shout to the world that I know, but in myself, if somebody asks me, I go, no, I don't know what you mean to say belief. I don't do that, but I know it's there. Now with Steiner's ideas, and I see plant growth, and people, well, what's life? Well, yeah, life's a mystery, man. It's what you think. It's way beyond that. You say, well, it's just cell division. Well, man, that's a sad picture of life. Life is truly a mystery. Consciousness, unexplained, unexplainable, truly a mystery. It's spiritual activity on the physical plane, right?
Mhm.
Self-awareness in human beings. Totally a mystery to me. So I now with anthroposophy, I can live into these ideas because they're phenomenological experience with these very interesting concepts that he gave me, right? That I would not have gotten, sadly, without him. At least not for a few more reincarnations, right? So, so anyway, I wanted to throw all that out there, and I don't know if that really dovetails well with what you were talking about, but I just wanted to throw that in there because it's been I've been happy with that explanation.
No, it works very well. And also, I'm sure when people are listening to this, or the audience are listening to this, I think it will be very helpful. I think it'll be very, very helpful because we all go to sleep, we all wake up. Um, maybe now we have a possibility to try to experience that that subtle phase between waking up and falling asleep. We do it every 24 hours or every 12 hours even. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, so I think it's very important that that we do talk about these things because it does act as a reminder. And I know that we could just say, well, we're just talking, we're just rambling, we're just regurgitating all of this stuff. Um, but I think it's important that we have these reminders. And that's one of my main, well, it's probably the most or the biggest motivator that I have for doing these talks, these conversations, is that I'm trying to embed, especially into the modern technology or this particular age that we're in, the, an opportunity or possibility for the continuation of, and I wouldn't say the message, more of the impulse,
yeah, thanks.
and to make sure that there's continuity and remembrance of the great works of the likes of Rudolf Steiner and many others. Of course, today we focused on Rudolf Steiner, but there are others, and that it will continue. And I said earlier, you know, what is left for us now that they're gone? You said maybe they're not gone. Maybe they're, well, between us, we sort of come to the conclusion that maybe they're here more now than they were before, just
Yeah,
not
yeah.
physically. And maybe the limitations of the physical or the planetary body, now once it's gone, maybe there's more. There's more freedom, more free will for that impulse to come through. And maybe this is why Gurdjieff says that those that when I've gone, those that come after me will know me more or will know the message more than those that are around me now.
And thank you, by the way, for what you're doing. I do really appreciate
Mm.
it very much, and it is important, and you're doing something wonderful. So just so you know, I know that.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I may have a particular audience. It may be an audience that wouldn't ordinarily come across the this data or this information. So yeah, I like to consider that I play a part, albeit a small part. I don't have a big subscription. Maybe it will grow. Who knows? But
Yeah, yeah.
maybe this is a good moment to end the conversation, and I'm sure we can do more. And
Anytime. I love talking to you. It's really fun.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're always welcome. So yeah, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Is there any last thoughts, or do you want to put information as to where people can contact you or get hold of your work? I can put stuff in the show notes or the description, so that's not a problem. But if there's anything you want to add or finish on, then
Maybe I will throw that out that the main site, which is rudolfsteineraudio.com, that's the one that's searchable more or less. And it has everything that I've done on it. I have another site called Podbean, rudolfsteiner.podbean.com, which is, they're more like podcasts, more streaming. You can control the speed and stuff. I don't have absolutely everything on there, but that's also mine. And when I put stuff on Podbean, it automatically goes up into Spotify and it goes up into what's called the Dale Brunsvold channel, a YouTube channel. But it's called Dale Brunsvold, and there's no ads or anything on that. I'm not I don't advertise that stuff. Can you still hear me?
yeah, yeah, yep,
Okay. And then there's a site called Rudolf Steiner Press Audio. And I just want people to know that that is, that's the most active site on the web, I think. But
Mhm.
it's not mine. And I don't really have anything to do with that. That's done by other people through the Rudolf Steiner Press, who are so nice to let me, use their translations to read Steiner and all that. So a lot of people write me say, well, why don't you do this on your, Rudolf Steiner Press audio site? And I go, that I don't have anything to do with that. That's not mine. So I thought I'd just say that one more
Sure.
time so people know they don't have to ask me about it. So, but it is cool that the comments are on now, I got to say. So,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
right, that's it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we'll wrap it up there, and yeah, you're always welcome to come back, and take care, Dale. Thank you for your
Blessings,
work.
sir.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.